You're listening to the weekly Parsha podcast, recorded with Hashem's never-ending assistance in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, 5775, 2015. This week's Parsha is Parsha Shemos. We have the beginning of the book of Exodus, the story of the Jewish people, their exile in Egypt, their exile in Mitzrayim, in that place, Meitzar Yam, the constriction of the concept of 50, of the transcendent realm. The Jewish people go there, and there they are enslaved by the forces of evil, by Egypt, which represents those forces. And Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, is sent by God, is asked by God to be the shliach, to be the messenger of God, to bring the people, to release the Jewish people from their bondage, from the forces of evil, from their bondage to Egypt. Now, in the conversation between Hashem, between God and Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, Hashem asks him to go indeed to be the shliach, to go and be this messenger, to be his agent in releasing the Jewish people from their bondage. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I'm not worthy. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I can't speak properly. Hashem says, go. Hashem says, go. Hashem says, go. Now, in this conversation, besides for Moshe Rabbeinu speaking about his own unworthiness, his own feelings of inadequacy, being a spokesman on behalf of the Jewish people, on behalf of God, Moshe Rabbeinu also feels that perhaps the Jewish people themselves do not have the merit, do not have the worthiness to be able to be released from their bondage, to be able to be freed from Egypt. So in chapter 4, verse 1, Moshe Rabbeinu says to God himself, Vayan Moshe vayomer, v'hein lo yaminu li. Moshe says to God, he says, the Jewish people are not going to believe me. Lo yishmu b'koili, that they're not going to listen to my voice. Ki yomer lo nira elech Hashem. They're not going to believe that God really revealed himself to me. Vayomer elav Hashem, ma ze biyodecha, vayomer mateh. God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, what's this in your hand? Look at what's in your hand. What's in your hand? And Moshe says, he responds and says, it's a staff. Vayomer hashlicheu arza. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, throw it down on the earth. Hashlicheu arza, he indeed throws it down. Vayhi lenachash. And the mateh, the staff, transforms into a snake. Vayanas Moshe mipanov. Moshe runs away from it. He sees that it's a live snake. It's a real snake. It's become a snake. He runs away. V'emer Hashem al Moshe. God says to Moses, Shlach yodcha ve'echoiz biznavoi. Send out your hand, reach out, grab onto its tail. V'shlach yadoi v'yechezak boi. Indeed, he reaches out his hand, he holds onto it, Vayhi lemate bechapoi. And in his hand, it transforms from a snake back into his staff. Now, in trying to understand this back and forth, the conversation between God and Moses, trying to understand what is the symbolism, what does the staff represent, why does it turn into a snake, why doesn't it turn into a sheep, why doesn't it turn into, I don't know, it could turn into anything. Why is it turned dafka specifically into a snake? What is Hashem trying to teach Moshe Rabbeinu? What is Moshe's doubt? What is Moshe afraid of that they're not going to believe, that the Jewish people are not going to believe that God appeared to him? What is Hashem saying to him? What does the sign represent that's going to allay the fears of the Jewish people? That's going to address the issue that Moshe Rabbeinu is concerned about. So to begin to think about this, we need to ask some questions. We need to say, well, what is a staff? What does the staff represent? What is the concept of the snake? What does it mean that the staff is turning into a snake? And what does it mean that by grabbing onto the tail of the snake, Moshe Rabbeinu is able to transform the snake back into a staff? What do each of these concepts, what is the staff, what is the snake, what is the transformation, what's going on here in this conversation? In explaining this idea, and explaining the symbolism here, Reb Nosson gives us the beginnings, he gives us a hint. And hopefully we'll be able to expand a little bit on it and try to apply it for ourselves. But he says that the concept of a mateh, the concept of a staff, the word mateh in Hebrew means a staff, but it can also mean to lean. Because a person who needs a staff, he needs it to lean upon. He can't walk so well sometimes, but he needs it to lean. So what it represents is that a person can lean in one direction or a person can lean in a different direction. There are different options in front of each person. That's the koach bechira, the power of free choice, which every individual has. And he can lean towards one side of his nature, toward the side of good, or he can lean toward a different side of his nature, toward the side of not so good. Says Reb Nosson, Moshe Rabbeinu was concerned. His fear was that the Jewish people wouldn't believe him. What does that really mean at the core? That God didn't appear to them? Why would they believe that God didn't appear to them? Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid that they didn't have the schus, they wouldn't have the merit to be able to leave Egypt. They wouldn't have the ability to leave, that Hashem wouldn't indeed be able to pull it off, so to speak, to be able to redeem them because of the fact that they had too many sins. Now what Hashem wanted him to see was that indeed it seems that way. Hashem says, take the mateh, take the staff which represents a person's bechira, his free choice. He can choose to lean in one direction, or he can choose to lean in a different direction. Throw it down on the ground, and what happens to that staff? It transforms into a snake. It transforms into a snake because the snake represents the side of evil, represents the forces of evil in the world. Represents the Egyptians. It seems like the Jewish people are following in the ways of the Egyptians. It seems like the Jewish people are misusing their bechira. They're serving idolatry. They're using their free will in the wrong way. They're leaning in the wrong direction. It seems to you that for that reason the Jewish people should not be able to be redeemed from Egypt. But Hashem says to him, don't make a mistake and think that they are not redeemable. Hashem says, pick up that staff. It has turned into a snake. It's so scary and so real that Moshe Rabbeinu, the redeemer of the Jewish people, runs away from the snake. It seems like there's no way for him to redeem them. Hashem says, no, don't run away. Stretch out your hand. Reach out to the Jewish people. Reach out to the sinners. Lift them up. Pick them up by their tail. And what happens? They transform back into a mateh. They get transformed back. They're brought back to a place where they can choose again. It seems like they've lost their ability to choose. Hashem says it's not true. They can still choose. They can be transformed back into a mateh, back into a staff. They can come back to their state of having free choice. It seems like they've lost that, but they can be returned there. And it's through your efforts, Hashem was saying. Hashem was saying to the tzadik. Moshe Rabbeinu represents the tzadik. And it also, the tzadik is not just about an individual who's a righteous individual, but it's also about the power of choice that we each have, the power of goodness that's inside of each and every one of us. Hashem was saying to him, you have the power to address the parts of Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people that seem to be out of control, that seem to be too distant from me to ever come back, who seem to have completely used their koach bechira, their free will, to leave a relationship with me. Hashem says, no, don't think that things are lost. Don't think that they've gone too far. There's always a possibility for them to come back. There's always a good. And you, the tzaddik, you, Moshe Rabbeinu, you, Moses, have the responsibility and the ability to be able to pick them up by the tail, to pick up that snake, to pull it out of being the mateh, the choice that's gone too far to the left, too far away from God. It's gone too far to separation. The left side represents separation from God. You have the ability to take it out of being a snake, to transform it back into a mateh, back into a staff, back to be able to choose once again to do what's right, to do what's good. Indeed, the Jewish people seem to be too distant to be redeemed, to be brought back into a relationship with me, but that's not true. The Jewish people can be redeemed. They can come back to a state of mateh, back to a state of being able to choose to lean in one direction or another. And through the Torah, through the commandments that I'm going to give them, the direction they're going to get at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, they're going to enter back into a relationship with me. They're going to be able to lean into the direction of good, to be able to choose the goodness, the wholeness, a relationship with Hashem. Now, in thinking about this idea of Reb Nosson, trying to understand the message that we can apply to our own lives, we certainly see that Moshe Rabbeinu was right. Moshe Rabbeinu was concerned that Jewish people didn't deserve to be redeemed, and he was right. They were in a state of nachash. They were in a state of being completely consumed by the evil of Mitzrayim, of Egypt. And Hashem confirmed that by having him throw it on the floor and it transformed into a snake. Indeed, the Jewish people were completely like that snake. They were completely consumed by evil. But Moshe Rabbeinu thought that meant that there's no chance for them. It's not going to be possible to redeem them. And Hashem said, no, it is possible. It's possible for them to be brought back to a state of bechira. You know, sometimes we look at ourselves and we say, there are certain behaviors that we might be doing, or there are certain interactions that we might have with our family, whatever it might be. And we think to ourselves, you know, this is something that's gone out of my control. This is something that's beyond my bechira. And indeed we find in Chazal, Rav Dessler speaks about the Bechira point, the point of free will, where things are beneath one's free will and things that are above one's free will. And we find elsewhere in Chazal that there are indeed people who lose their Bechira, they lose their free will. They become so shakua, they become so entrenched in sin that it seems that it's impossible for them to have a choice. They've lost their choice. Now what we see in Reb Nosson is that indeed that's something that can happen. It's something that can happen to an individual, but the Torah maps out for us and shows us that it's possible to be stuck in that state and to be pulled out of that state, to be able to get back one's free will, to get back one's Bechira. And so the question becomes, how do I get back my Bechira? How do I get back my free will? If I have lost my free will, if I've become so habituated to do certain things, to have certain behaviors, to interact in certain ways with my spouse, with my children, whatever it might be, if that's happened, how do I get out of that type of snaky situation, that nachash behavior, so to speak? How does one get out of it? So I'm thinking, I don't think this is what Reb Nosson is saying, but I do think that we can see it in the psukim perhaps, or we can see a hint to it in what Reb Nosson is saying in the symbolism here. Recently I had a conversation with a mentor of mine, a spiritual mentor, and it came up that there were certain things that I was doing that I wasn't so happy about. And one of the things that he told me was that one of the most important things that a person can do is be honest. Be honest about the fact that this behavior is happening, not try to deny it. Sometimes there's this behavior that I might be doing that I'm not proud of. That's not good. That's not it's not where I should be spiritually. But when I acknowledge that it's happening, and I don't deny it, I'm just open with people about it. I admit it. I admit it to myself. I admit it to my friends, the people who are on the same spiritual journey as me. I admit it to Hashem. That these things that I'm doing is not really what I want to be doing. Instead of denying it and keeping it inside of me and keeping it a secret, when I let it out. So that's one of the most important things I can say in the morning or at night before I go to sleep. I chose today not to be committed to my spirituality. And this doesn't mean that it completely, I'm not judging myself here. I'm just being honest. In this particular circumstance or this particular behavior, I chose today, and I have a choice. I have a choice today whether to continue along the lines. There are certain things I don't have a choice over. My initial reaction, I don't necessarily have a choice over, but my second thought, my first action, first thing that I do, the question is, am I mevatel myself? Do I give myself up to Hashem in my action? Or the actions, I have free will. I have free will. It seems like the snake has taken me over. But where am I? What am I choosing? Just a statement at the end of the day. I chose today not to be committed to my spirituality. That type of statement helps me to be more aware of it the following day. Helps me to be more honest with myself when the choices are coming up, when the challenges arise. Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem has this interaction with Moshe. Moshe says, the Jewish people are not where they should be. And Hashem acknowledges that. And he says, look, indeed, there's a snake here. We have to call a spade a spade. We have to call a snake a snake. We have to be honest about the situation here. And that snake is so real. It's so scary. Moshe Rabbeinu runs away from it. And sometimes we look at ourselves and we're so saddened by our choices, the choices we may have made, that we want to run away. We don't want to face it. We don't want to, grab the snake by its tail. And Hashem says, no, come back, reach down, reach out your hand, and be honest with what's going on. Reach out your hand. This is not a judgment. This is not a moral judgment. I'm not a bad person because I've done these things, but I need to be honest about it with myself, with those who are around me, who are traveling my spiritual journey with me. I need to be honest with Hashem. And when I'm committed to that honesty, what happens is indeed I pick up that snake by the tail. And I say, look, this is my snake. And what happens is the scary snake that seemed to be overwhelming, that seemed to be out of control, that seemed to be without boundaries, all of a sudden it's like a little kid who the parent puts the child in timeout and says, look, this behavior has to stop. I need to be honest about it. This is a red line. I can't continue this way. And so a person gets their bechira back slowly. We spoke about previously the idea of patience, the idea of transcending. But the idea here is that it's slowly, it's patiently, and it's honestly. It's being honest about where we are in this moment, in this day, with ourselves, with others, with Hashem. I want to bless you, and I ask you to please bless me back, that Hashem should help us to have that honesty, to recognize when we've used our bechira, when we've used our mateh, we've used our staff, we've leaned in the wrong direction. Hashem should help us to be honest with ourselves. Hashem should help us to be able to bring our staff, to lean back to the center, to get back our bechira, to get back our free choice, to be able to connect with others who are also searching for that ability. Hashem should help us to be able to lean back towards the side of good, to transform the snake inside of us back into a mateh, back into a staff. And that staff is the very staff that will perform miracles for us and release us from our bondage and bring us to an exodus from our spiritual slavery and help us indeed be able to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful Shabbos. This podcast was made possible through the gracious donations of listeners like you. For more podcasts like this, please visit www.arigoldwag.com or search on iTunes Ari Goldwag.